Joining us now is Professor OMOWUNMI Iledare, who is the Professor Emeritus in Petroleum Economics and Policy Research. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Nice to be here with you. Happy Sunday morning to you.
Happy Sunday. Well, let's get straight into it. We know that the issues surrounding oil are pertinent. If we were to start with oil, for example, we know that the oil price in the country has fallen, and that naturally has negative ramifications for the Nigerian economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, again, we've lived with volatile oil prices for the past since the 70s. The price of oil has gone up and down, and that's why the budgeting process should not necessarily be tied to oil price, but something else. If we want to be able to absorb ourselves from volatility of oil prices, then diversification of the economy from oil becomes imperative.
Naturally, we've talked about the need to diversify the Nigerian economy away from oil and natural resources. We've been having this conversation for decades, in fact. The fact remains that we have not. Why do you think that there is still so much dependence despite the volatilities attached to that?
Well, to me, I think Nigeria should look at oil not as a source of revenue, but more of a source of power to drive the economy. So Nigerians must, to me, do their best to link the oil sector to other sectors of the economy. And until we do that, we'll continue to not get the benefit of oil sector in the overall economic engine of the nation. So what happens is that when you look at oil as a source of revenue, you put yourself at risk, whereby nearly every sector of the economy is driven by the government rather than by the private sector, and it's because of this emphasis of using oil as a source of revenue, not necessarily as the engine that drives the economy. There must be a way to develop policy that we have both backward linkage and forward linkage so as to be able to increase the contribution of the oil sector to the GDP. And it begins with an effective and efficient policy.
And Professor, what exactly is the missing link when it comes to the issue of diversifying Nigeria's economy from a monoproduct, like petroleum? Take, for example, Nigeria imports palm oil. 90 billion naira is what Nigeria spends on palm oil, a resource that it has in abundance. Exactly what is, the problem?
Well, to me, and I've said it in many mediums before, oil money should be used for infrastructure development, not for direct consumption. Until we begin to look at oil money as a way to build infrastructure for the future, which then will facilitate the ability to move products. Like if we continue to do what Gowon did in the 70s, which we are reaping today, where Gowon invested the bulk of the oil money to train people like me, send us to school. And you see the amount of money that the diaspora people are remitting because of the type of training they receive using oil money in the 70s. If you use oil money, for example, to build infrastructure, like your refineries are working, like your roads networks, the energy infrastructure is stabilized, that in a way we open the economy in such a way that will be a bigger multiplier effect, but we don't do it. If you look at the people that have access to oil money in Nigeria, the bulk of the money is spent on goods and services that are made abroad, and the value creation is so limited based on buy and sell. So to me, if we are going to diversify our economy, we need to move away from using oil for what I call lifestyle that is not sustainable, and then begin to build infrastructure. In that case, you are thinking about the National Assembly developing what we call Revenue Management Act, whereby a great proportion of the oil money is not for concurrent expenditure, but for infrastructure development. That's the only way you can link the economy to the oil sector in such a way that the employment basis and the movement of lower income level to higher income level will increase. That's what Dubai did. That's what Qatar did. That's what you see majority of other OPEC countries did which Nigeria has not done. And it's not late. We can begin with the current National Assembly to have a petroleum revenue management. And I don't believe there's any constitutional limitation to spending oil money for infrastructure development. The will just have to be there, which is what is lacking today.
Now, Professor Iledare, what do you have to say to the fact that when we speak about the subject of power and the government contract awarded to Siemens, what do you have to say to the fact that people are stating that these government contracts are not effective and the government cannot continue to keep guaranteeing the generation companies when it has already sunk over 1.5 trillion naira into this sector?
Well, to me, I think we need to come to terms with the fact that the electricity is not a social good and it is not a public good, because there is what I call rivalry in consumption, and there's also what I'll call exclusivity. So in that case, electricity market is an economic good. Now, the government also must understand that the market structure for electricity is completely different. And so there must be a long-term investment, and the government does not have the fund to generate the type of electricity. We're talking in terms of, in the short run, Nigeria needs about 10 to 15 megawatt of electricity, and perhaps 10,000 rather. And perhaps in the long run, you are looking at about 25,000 megawatts of electricity to support our economy. So there must be adequate tariff and adequate investment. There cannot be a tariff increase if there's no investment to justify that. Again, the governance structure of the energy sector in Nigeria is inefficient, ineffective, unethical, and inequitable. And in order to do that, government must allow Nigerian Electric Regulatory Commission to do its work without political interference.
Yes.
Charity begins at home. If the
point.
MDAs and the government is not paying their tariff, then what do you expect consumers to do? And if the discos will not invest in meters to collect their revenue and continue to do what I call illegal estimated billing, because estimated billing requires ratification the next time you go to read the meter. All of those things are important. And I continue to suggest that we need to revisit the Electricity Act of 2005. It's almost 15 years ago. No law is perpetual. If it is not working, go back to the drawing table and rectify it. That's the function of the government. Those are the functions of institutions that are supposed to manage the energy sector, in my opinion.
And one wonders exactly why that Power Policy Act of 2005 has failed to work. And according to the IMF, Nigeria has lost, and Nigeria actually loses about $29 billion every year to, electricity supply problems. Would you be on the same page with those who say that the power sector is over-centralized, where everyone is connected to the power grid?
Of course, that's why you have a lot of losses. All over the world, regionalization of electricity market is practiced. You don't have to generate it in zone A and put it on the central distribution line or transmission line before zone A consumes power that are generated within their community. Nearly everything that is centralized in Nigeria is not working. The police force, the education system, nearly everything. So centralization is an old school of thought. We need to be able to regionalize the energy market. Now, let us, in all honesty, they tried by having all of these discos in different zones, but they are too big. A monopoly structure cannot be that big. So that's one of the reasons why the government needs to go back to the drawing board and see, how can you have Ibadan electricity zone that extends all the way from Ibadan as far as Lokoja? The management of it will become much more difficult. We call it diseconomy of scale, where you see inefficiency and thingles and what I call maximization of social welfare loss with those type of arrangements. The government should always have the power to go back and revisit what they did that is not working, and move away from patronage and sentiment, because patronage and sentiments for governing the oil and gas sector will not deliver the type of efficiency that is required to move Nigeria forward. Let me quickly add, there's a direct relationship between per capita economic output and per capita energy consumption. So basically, when you don't consume energy, you do not grow.
All right, Professor Emeritus in Petroleum Economics, Professor Iledare, let me put you on hold. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been talking with Professor OMOWUNMI Iledare on the power sector, and of course we'll try to explore other aspects of the Nigerian economy. Thanks for staying with us. You were making a point earlier, on some of the challenges of the Nigerian sector, but let's put this in. Nigeria has, is the 9th largest gas reserves. It has that in the world. And South Africa, a country of about 80 million or so, actually has about 50,000 megawatts of electricity, in spite of ESCOM's challenges right now. Is it time for Nigeria to begin to explore other, sources of energy? Talk about wind, solar, hydro.
Well, certainly, energy policy must be mixed. The supply of energy must be mixed. Nobody is advocating that one source must fit all. But let me explain what is important, and we call it comparative advantage. You cannot have a cheap source of energy, even despite the environmental challenges, and decide to go and be using a more expensive energy source. So you need to balance it. So again, I'll continue to advocate what we call optimal energy supply mix strategy. Where solar is advantageous, let's pursue it. Where wind is advantageous, let's pursue it. Where gas or other fossil fuel is what's going to deliver, let's pursue it. And that's where regionalization of energy supply and energy distribution is very important. And that's why we have the Energy Commission of Nigeria. It's not necessarily about renewable alone. The Energy Commission of Nigeria is supposed to have energy planning strategy. And I think they try their best, that's what they do. But they need to not just limit themselves to renewable and have a composite energy strategy for the entire nation and make recommendations. And that's why we need to even think of where such commission is located. Currently, they are in the office, they are in the Ministry of Science and Technology. Some of these things do matter. If they are going to deliver, they don't belong to the Ministry of Science and Technology. They belong somewhere else. In fact, they belong to the presidency. And that's why the structure and the governance of the energy sector is so critical. And until we come to the realization that this is important, we are just continuing to be dilly-dallying and not necessarily put energy supply mix in the proper perspective. So it's okay to look at other sources, but you must keep into mind the comparative advantage of each of the sources to be able to deliver the optimal energy need for a nation like us. 25,000 megawatts is a child play for a 200 million population. So we need to look into the future, and that's what Energy Commission of Nigeria is supposed to be doing. It's not about now for them, it's about the future. That's why you see in Europe and in Asia, they are thinking in terms of a completely different source of energy, because they are not sure whether they're going to be able to get fossil fuel when this country producing it begin to use it for their own economic development. And that's why they are looking into the future in case fossil fuel is no longer available to them. And that's what we should be doing too.
Now, Professor Iledare, piggybacking off Ngozi's point, Nigeria has arguably the cheapest electricity in Africa, in West Africa, in fact, and it's not the poorest by any means. In fact, even Burkina Faso has a collection rate of 98%. So how, therefore, do we solve these market issues, the problems of market issues?
Well, again, we have to realize that intellectual debate is a normal process to be able to accomplish a design goal. I mean, I live mostly in Ghana now, and I know how much I pay for electricity. In fact, I was just talking to my assistant yesterday, and he said, I have 10,000 naira electricity over the last 6 months. In Ghana, I've paid more than 66,000 naira for a smaller apartment. You must price goods and services accordingly if you want supply to meet up with demand. Right now, we are not doing it. We are not doing it for petroleum products. We are not doing it for electricity. And of course, we always use this idea that we have abundant natural gas, so why should electricity not be cheaper than other parts of the world? But you don't just get gas. You don't just get electricity from gas. It requires a lot of investment. And investment must have adequate return for their investment. Investors must have adequate return for their investment. And in order to get adequate return for your investment, the commodity you are selling must be priced accordingly. Until we come to understand this, we are not going to be able to solve the electricity problem. First, we don't have the money to invest to generate power. Those who are going to bring the money once return, which means there's an opportunity cost for bringing money to Nigeria to generate electricity. And they are going to be compared to other alternative investment. So that is the essence of NERC. You have investment, there's a tariff that will deliver the demand and the supply of electricity. And there must be a market clearing price. And we must understand that. We don't. We just believe that intellectual thinking is not necessary for us to go to the next level. And that's why we allow our university to deteriorate, that we don't even produce employable students anymore. We need to rethink and make sure that all the sectors are connected to be able to deliver the goods and services that is required for Nigerians to enjoy the quality of life that, in my opinion, only 10% of Nigerians are enjoying. We can't continue like this.
Exactly.
The future must depend on adequate energy supply.
Yes, well, Professor Iledare, you made a great point there in your response just then when you said, using your own experience, that you pay arguably a lot more in Ghana for electricity, but the quality of service that you're experiencing there makes it worth it. And ultimately, you believe that consumers have to be ready and prepared to pay more for better service. That is natural, but the ability to do that is a hallmark of an economy in good health. And what we're seeing with the Nigerian economy is that it's not in its greatest shape. And if we were to switch gears of this conversation and look at the fiscal side of the Nigerian economy, there's lots to talk about. We know that as it stands, Nigeria's inflation rate is around 12.13%. We know that long-term goals are to bring inflation into single-digit terms. Obviously, a very difficult issue to do that. In addition to that, we know that the Central Bank of Nigeria says that it's planning to bring its savings rate down to 1%. The idea behind that is that it would foster more funds being lent by banks to retail sectors and to small and medium enterprises that they hope would kickstart the economy. Do you think that that is a feasible way to galvanize the economy by bringing the savings rate down to 1%?
Well, listen, I'm not a microeconomist, but I know enough economics to be able to make some what I call intellectual opinion. The function of the central bank all over the world is to manage inflation. That's the primary function. And the only way the central bank can manage the inflation is through what we call money supply strategy and instruments. Listen, inflation, interest rate, economic growth, unemployment rate are connected. They are macroeconomic indices. But when you have too much money chasing the goods and services, you don't have anything but inflation. Imagine. So what you have in the Nigerian economy is a situation in which all the macroeconomic indicators are going in the opposite direction. And it becomes imperative for the Central Bank of Nigeria to think outside the box to solve peculiar problems that is related. We cannot continue to depend on IMF prescriptions. We must look inward and get solutions to our problem, and quickly. It begins with exchange rate, whereby for many years now we have not been able to manage it. Indirectly, it affects the economy. It also begins, another thing is the way the central bank is creating what I call a recovery strategy, pumping too much money to stabilize the exchange rate. And I've not seen any result that is in any way generating economic output. So all of these are interrelated. Listen, I know the central bank has competent workforce. They must remain apolitical. And that's why I'd hope that every central bank governor should not allow second-term appointment to make them lose the direction they should be going. Right. Take the first appointment that you are given, do something that's going to change the economic landscape.
Do you think
No,
politics
no,
is getting in the way of policy?
Well, listen, I'm not in their meeting councils, but you could see it has happened before. Nearly all leadership that are appointed, they allow the second term to derail them. Go back to NERC. Don't let me mention him. Because you want to be appointed second term, you allow the tariff to come down. Look at Soludo. If I'm making names, I'm sorry about that. He did fantastically if you are just not mind. The same thing with the current governor. Don't allow second term to allow political interference in management of money supply until we come to terms with that. It's not that we don't have technical capability to solve Nigerian problems. I have confidence in the professionals in Nigeria. What we lack, in my opinion, is management skill. And it has to do with the process in which the leadership are appointed. If we are able to look at that, let me quickly give an example, not diverting your questions. Go to Indorama Petrochemicals. Who are the people working there? They are Nigerians. The only thing that has changed is the management skill. Let us begin to look at how we pick our leaders. In our university system, in our institutions, let leadership selection be competitive and not on the basis of patronage and sentiment. The central bank has the competence to manage Nigerian macroeconomic instability that will just let them do the work. They know what to do.
Well, Professor Iledare, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us your analysis on the Nigerian power sector and other macroeconomic issues.